Thanks a lot. Right, thanks to the organizers. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks to Terry for arranging all of this. I would like to talk for about 40-50 minutes. It might be a little bit longer, but I will try to keep it fairly short. And then I hope we can have a good discussion about these things that I intend to bring up tonight. Okay, so the title of my book is The Conservative Leftist, Multiculturalism and the Betrayal of Socialism. So what is a conservative leftist? In order to clarify this, I would like to make a distinction, an important distinction, between two forms of quote-unquote leftist idea or leftist politics. The one that I would like to refer to as a classic leftist stance. Here you find people like Perry Anderson, Marxist, Slavoj Žižek, and also people like Nancy Fraser and Mabel Berezin. And that's what I will refer to as a classic leftist stance. And that's not what I will talk about tonight. I will talk about the other version of left. I don't really think it's a leftist idea at all. But anyway, these are the multiculturalists. These are the multiculturalists. And these two forms of leftist ideas are, in my view, very different. Because on the one hand, you have a classic leftist approach, cherishing ideas. You could sum up these ideas with the idea of the Enlightenment, or you could sum up these ideas with the idea of modernity. And on the other hand, you have the multiculturalists. Of course, you can say there are multiculturalists throughout the political spectrum, but I would still argue that multiculturalism as such has emanated from a leftist perspective. And here you find people who are obsessed not with class, because class they have somehow forgotten. They have become obsessed with ethnicity and with culture. And I would like to say that between these two forms of leftist idea, there is an others. And I would even like to argue that if you would like to find possibly the most important, the most urgent tension in politics today, you don't need to talk about left and right. You can talk about what's going on inside of the leftist spectrum, namely between the classic leftists, the modernists, and the multiculturalists, who I claim are anti-modernists. They are anti-modernists, even though they pretend to be progressives, radicals, etc., leftists. But I think there is something very distinctly complicated, and there's a kind of delusion going on here. A delusion writ large. Okay. And the subtitle, okay, because the title of this talk is The Conservative Leftist, and I said a little bit about the conservative leftists, and that is, in my view, as I said, the multiculturalist. Then what about multiculturalism and the betrayal of socialism? Well, that relates, of course, to what I've just been talking about, because I think that multiculturalism is counterproductive. Multiculturalism believes to foster a great variety of ideas and values and a kind of society. But I think this is a delusion. I think that multiculturalism under the surface is fostering the opposite. It is completely counterproductive, and I have a lot of examples of this in my book, and I will just mention my book in a few seconds. And I think to put it in maybe not harsh words, but I think if you'd like to sum it up, I would like to argue that hundreds of years of socialist struggle is under attack by multiculturalism and by multiculturalists. Because the socialist struggle has been a struggle for modernity. And now we see people who claim to be leftists, who, even though they don't know it, are busy erasing, dismantling, putting an end to the entire socialist struggle of a modern society. I know some of you might think this is completely wrong, but I'm happy to have a discussion afterwards. But this is, I think, and I have a lot of arguments in favor of this. And now I'd like to bring up my book. So this is the book. The book is called The Trojan Horse, a Leftist Critique of Multiculturalism in the West. And what is the Trojan Horse? Well, the Trojan Horse, the image of the Trojan Horse, of course, is something you drag inside into your society, and then it is not what you think it is. You think it's a war trophy, but out comes values or ideas or individuals, and it is not quite what you think it is. It is actually something that might change society into something that is not what you hope it is. And the Trojan Horse in this book, of course, is multiculturalism. And to put it very short, I will give a couple of examples now to flesh out my ideas. But to put it very short, multiculturalism is perceived to be a leftist idea, and also it's defended by the multiculturalists. But it is in fact, at best, a conservative idea, if not a reactionary idea. The practical consequences of multiculturalism has nothing to do with the leftist ideology. It doesn't foster progressive ideas. It doesn't foster a radical society. It doesn't foster equality. It doesn't just foster anything, related to socialism or even social democracy or liberalism. And I'm not talking about neoliberalism, but classic liberalism. It is fostering a conservative society. And I'd like to. I read a book by George Orwell when I was writing this book, and Orwell says that you can have any kinds of ideas, that's fine, but at least you should be aware of the ideas that you are cherishing. And if I talk to a Marxist, if I talk to I would claim I'm some kind of left liberal myself, but if I talk to people who have all kinds of political views, like a Marxist is a good example, they know what kinds of ideas they are in fact defending and trying to advocate. But the problem, my problem and many people's problem with multiculturalists, and I will argue, and I will give examples of this of course, is that multiculturalists, in my view, they do not know what kinds of arguments they are, what kinds of society they are in fact fostering. And that makes a conversation or a discussion or a debate or some kind of heated discussion with a multiculturalist, it becomes a very strange thing, like a nightmare, because you talk to someone who says things and then it means something else. That's how I see it. Maybe you have other ideas about this. Anyway, this is right. So that's the gist of this book. I think that this is a Trojan horse. And, yeah. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to bring up a couple of examples from my book where I would like to defend my approach. And also, before I do that, I would like to say that this book, I have a few books here with me. So if anyone would be interested afterwards, they're for sale, £15. So they're here. So we can deal with that later. Right. I will now give a few examples why I believe that multiculturalism is actually a deeply conservative idea, at best a deeply conservative idea, if not a reactionary idea. Right. The first example has to do with emancipation. Multiculturalists, they say that multiculturalism and diversity, the ideology of diversity, is emancipatory. It's emancipating for people. But who? That's the question. Who or what really is being emancipated? That's the question. Because if you say that something is emancipating, if something is liberating, you should actually spell out, well, Who or what is being liberated? From what? And so I think the idea of emancipation is being used sometimes rather sloppily in order to pretend to be tolerant, leftist, nice, clever, because nobody is supposed to be, nobody would like to say, I'm opposed to emancipation. You can't say that these days. You can't say that. But I would like to say that unless someone specifies what is being emancipated and for the sake of what. Yeah. So what is being emancipated according to the ideology of multiculturalism? Well, that is the so-called ethnic minority. The so-called ethnic minority is being emancipated. So what is this? What is being emancipated? Well, as you can hear what I'm trying to bring out. It is not about individuals. This is a kind of collectivist emancipation. It's a collectivist, holistic emancipation of a group. This has nothing to do with individuals. And the funny thing here is that if you talk to multiculturalists, if you talk to people who strongly believe in multiculturalism, you can talk to them, you can argue with them for hours, for days, even months, without the word individual coming up. It simply doesn't. So, and so I think it is rather clear, or it seems to me at least, that the way multiculturalists argue, it is an extremely collectivist, anti-individualist ideology. Extremely collectivist, extremely anti-individualist ideology, in my view. And and this leads on to the problem of what is being emancipated, namely the culture. The culture is emancipated as a whole entity, emancipated. And what is it emancipated from? Well, it is emancipated from the host community, of course. For instance, from Sweden. For instance, from Germany, where I've been in Munich a couple of weeks, or from London, or from the West. Yeah? And that kind of emancipation is widely cherished by the multiculturalists. Widely cherished. Fostered, defended, protected, pampered. It's about country, it's about ethnicity, it's about, race. But what about the individuals within these minorities? Well, as I just mentioned before, the individuals are not mentioned in the ideology of multiculturalism. It is not mentioned, they are not mentioned. They somehow disappear into like some kind of grey, a grey mass into the idea of multiculturalism. And this, I think, is very interesting because multiculturalists, they keep talking about a colourful society, rainbow society. But as soon as we look into inside the ethnic communities, it becomes terrifyingly grey. It doesn't make sense to me, If something is supposed to be colourful, everything should be colourful. Even the people inside ethnic communities should be very colourful. But somehow now, their faces are gone. The only thing we see, the only thing we are allowed to see is the ethnic community as one proud minority, breaking free, breaking loose from the, from the supposedly oppressive structures of the host community, namely the West, namely modern society. And this kitschy image, this kitschy collectivist, holistic image of cultures overseas is also constantly fueled by well-meaning Westerners. And these well-meaning Westerners are the multiculturalists, of course, not the classic leftists, not Slavoj Žižek, for instance. He says multiculturalism is a disgrace. And that's another funny thing, because if you talk to multiculturalists and if you bring up Slavoj Žižek, they all love him. They all love him. And then you bring this up. Okay, do you know what he says about multiculturalism? He thinks it's terrible. Simply terrible. Yeah. I would like to talk more about Slavoj Žižek's approach to multiculturalism, but then time will fly too quickly. I would just give you a little example of this. I have an acquaintance, or actually I haven't seen him for many years, a guy from the Ivory Coast, and he lives in Lund, I guess, still, and 10 years back when I met him,